This episode is powered by Pod Decks. Pod Decks are unique interview questions and episode starting prompts in the palm of your hand. So whether you're a new podcaster or existing broadcaster looking to grow your audience and have more meaningful conversations, you're going to want to check out Pod Decks. Now, if you want to get 10% off your order right now, you can go to poddecks.com and type in coupon code. What's the code?
Larry21.
Yes, that's the code. Check out poddecks.com. Take your podcast to the next level.
Welcome to the True Crime Never Sleeps podcast. We dive into stories of true crime, from unsolved cold cases to historic kidnapping to gangsters and beyond. We are your source for true crime. We thank you for listening. Welcome to the True Crime Never Sleeps podcast. I am your host, Larry Lee. Today we're diving into a child star murdered by her own father in a horrifying double homicide. First, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Poddex, for sponsoring this episode. Check them out today at poddex.com. And when you purchase from their store, use promo code Larry21 for 10% off your order. And now let's dive in. If you were a child of the 80s, you might remember an animated film called All Dogs Go to Heaven. Its theatrical release in 1989 was overshadowed by Disney's Little Mermaid, which came out the same day. Nevertheless, the VHS release was a huge success, which is how I came to watch this movie on repeat quite a few times. The film is about a fun-loving, fast-talking dog who is murdered by his former friend. Instead of going to heaven, he cons his way into staying on Earth so that he can avenge his death. Along the way, he teams up with colorful characters, including a sweet orphan girl who teaches him about kindness, friendship, and love. The film's ending credits song, Love Survives, was dedicated to Judith Barsi, the young actress who played the orphan girl. As a kid, I had no idea what this dedication meant. Years later, I was shocked and saddened to learn that the All Dogs Go to Heaven was Judith's last film before she and her mother were murdered by her father in a double murder-suicide. Judith Eva Barsi was born in Los Angeles, California on June 6, 1978. Her parents were both Hungarian immigrants. Apologize, but there's no way I can say the parents' names correctly. So I'll go by their first names. Maria was a mama girl before that term existed. From the age of 5, Maria aggressively pushed her daughter towards stardom. Luckily, Judith was a naturally gifted actress. She would appear in over 70 commercials during her short career, as well as in numerous television shows and films. The director of All Dogs Go to Heaven praised her as absolutely astonishing, and he stated his intention to feature her prominently in his future productions. By the time Judith started 4th grade, she was earning an estimated $100,000 a year, which allowed her family to live a lavish lifestyle. Instead of being proud of his brilliant daughter, whose stardom financially supported the entire family, he resented her success and close relationship with her mother. It's worth noting that Judith's first role was in the 1984 TV miniseries Fatal Vision, in which she played the daughter of a U.S. Army officer who murdered his wife and daughters. The show was based on a real-life case and ominously foreshadowed the tragedy that would fall upon the Barsi family 4 years later. Maria and Judith endured years of Joseph's abuse. Joseph was an abusive alcoholic. During his alcohol-fueled rages, he would routinely threaten to kill himself. Maria and Judith threatened to kill himself, Maria and Judith, and burn their house down. Inevitably, Joseph's verbal abuse escalated to physical. After one particularly violent incident, Maria called the police and claimed that her husband had punched and choked her. However, by the time the police showed up, she asked that they drop the matter. The police agreed, as they could not see any visible bruises on Maria's face. Despite the unimaginable stress of living with an abusive parent on top of being the family's breadwinner and not yet even 10 years old, Judith was a consummate professional, always putting a brave face at work. But a child can only take so much. Judith began gaining weight and exhibiting disturbing behaviors, such as pulling at her eyelashes, pulling at her cat's whiskers. In 1988, Judith had a mental breakdown in front of her agent while auditioning for what would be her final film, All Dogs Go to Heaven. Her agent listened in horror to a hysterical Judith, describing some of her father's abuse. She immediately took her to a child psychologist, who determined that Judith was a victim of severe child abuse. Now that Child Protective Services were involved, one would hope that Maria and Judith could finally escape their nightmare situation. But Maria convinced the caseworker that she had everything under control. She promised that she would leave her husband, explaining that she already had a secret apartment where she and Judith sometimes went to get a respite from him. Maria's friends begged her to leave Joseph. Their friends and neighbors were all too familiar with the never-ending cycle of violence in the Barsi household. One neighbor claimed that Joseph boasted over 500 times that he planned to kill his wife. In a heartbreaking move that would cost her her life, Maria chose to stay. Her young daughter had just had a mental breakdown. Still, Maria simply could not bear to part with her fancy Hollywood lifestyle. On July 25th, 1988, Judith spent the last day of her life riding a bicycle around her neighborhood. Later that night, Joseph walked into his daughter's bedroom, placed a gun in her head, and pulled the trigger. Maria heard the gunshot and immediately ran to Judith's room. Joseph then shot his wife. After leaving the bodies where they were for 2 days, he poured gasoline over the bodies and set them on fire before turning the gun on himself. A neighbor who heard the final gunshot called the police. Another neighbor saw smoke and called the fire station. Joseph had made good on his threats to destroy his family and home. The bodies were beyond recognition. Police openly wept as they carried Judith's little body out of the house. Judith and her mother are buried in adjoining plots in Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. What saddens me the most is that while this case is unique in its own tragic way, domestic violence as a whole is just as prevalent today, and just as insidious. I know that Maria was also a victim of her husband's cruelty, but I can't help but want to blame as many people as possible for Judith's death. Why were the police and Child Protective Services so eager to believe Maria's version of events, rather than investigate further? Especially as a child was involved. Unfortunately, I know the answers to these rhetorical questions. Things were different in the 80s. Police weren't as aware of battered woman syndrome and how the symptoms manifest. Child Protective Services were, and still are, underfunded and understaffed. Children fall through the cracks all the time. And we as individuals still feel uncomfortable inserting ourselves in family matters that are, quote, none of our business. Now, when I watch All Dogs Go to Heaven, I can't help but note the bitter contrast of Judith's ending in real life versus that of her character who's adopted by loving parents who dote on her and protect her. I was a little kid when I first saw this film. I take small comfort in the fact that she is finally safe and at peace. All dogs go to heaven, and I like to think that all children do as well. And that is all we have for this episode of True Crime Never Sleeps podcast on Murder Monday. Let us know your thoughts on this case. Have you ever watched All Dogs Go to Heaven? And were you aware of this shocking and disturbing suicide? Let us know in the comment section below. As always, subscribe to the podcast on all major podcast platforms, including Good Pods. And if you listen on Spotify, please consider giving us a review. It's a new feature that Spotify finally released after begging from content creators like myself. And if you want to support the show, you can buy us a coffee, buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. Your support helps the show grow. We thank you for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time. You have been listening to the True Crime Never Sleeps podcast. Thank you for listening. You can follow us on Facebook at True Crime Never Sleeps podcast and on Twitter at True Crime NS. And follow us on Instagram at True Crime Never Sleeps. Thanks for watching. If you want to support the show, buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNN or become a patron at patreon.com/True Crime Never Sleeps.